She was only 7 when she decided to do what no adult around her had the courage to do, ask a gang of leather-clad bikers to walk her to school. The words left her mouth shaking, but what happened next would shake an entire town. Before I tell you what these bikers did tell me this, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Because this story about fear, courage, and the unexpected kindness of strangers could happen anywhere. Stay with me. There's a twist coming you won't see coming. It started in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of mountain town that looks safe from the outside. The air smells like roasted coffee and rain. Tourists take pictures on the Blue Ridge Parkway. But behind one quiet apartment complex on Riverside Drive, a little girl named Maddie Cole stopped believing her street was safe. Every day she walked to Riverside Elementary, clutching the straps of her faded pink backpack, pretending not to hear the boys who followed her. They called her names too ugly for a child to repeat. Sometimes they threw things. Sometimes they just whispered threats that stayed in her ears long after she got home. At first, Maddie tried to tell her teacher. "Boys will be boys," the woman said, not even looking up from her desk. Her mom, Erin, worked double shifts at the hospital, and when Maddie tried to explain the shadows that followed her, Erin's face folded with exhaustion. She promised to call the school again, but nothing changed. By the 3rd week, Maddie stopped sleeping. She'd lie awake watching the headlights crawl across the ceiling, clutching a small felt bear her grandmother had sewn. She called it Lucky. It didn't stop the nightmares, but it gave her something to hold when the fear got too loud. One morning before dawn, Maddie heard a low rumble rolling through the valley. Not thunder engines. Heavy, deep, steady. She went to the window and saw a group of motorcycles gliding down the empty street, their headlights cutting through the fog like comets. Everyone in town said those bikers were trouble veterans, drifters, misfits. But Maddie noticed something different. When a cat darted across the road, they slowed down. When they passed the diner near the river, one of them waved at the woman sweeping the front steps. Scary looking, sure, but not scary acting. That thought stuck in her mind all night. Maybe the people who scared everyone else could scare the ones who scared her. She didn't know their names. She just remembered the diner sign flickering pink over their heads like a beacon. By morning, she had made up her mind. At 6:30 a.m., Erin was in the shower getting ready for another 12-hour shift. Maddie quietly slipped on her sneakers, tucked Lucky inside her jacket, and crept out the door. The air was cold enough to make her breath visible. She walked past the bakery that smelled like cinnamon past the bus stop, where the older kids waited, and turned toward the diner. Her stomach hurt. Every step felt heavier, but fear had already taken so much from her. Her laughter, her sleep, her mornings. She wasn't letting it take her courage, too. The bell above the diner door chimed when she pushed it open. The smell of bacon and black coffee filled the air. Conversation paused as the regulars looked up. There they were, 5 bikers at the counter, leather jackets patched with skulls and flags, faces weathered by wind and miles. Maddie's voice came out smaller than she expected. "Excuse me," she said, "can you walk me to school?" The tallest man, broad-shouldered with silver streaks in his beard, blinked as if he wasn't sure he'd heard her right. What was that, sweetheart? She took a breath. "Some boys follow me, they wait for me. I just want to feel safe." Every sound in the diner seemed to disappear, the sizzle on the grill, the hum of the neon sign, even the clink of spoons. The man set down his mug. "What's your name, Maddie?" He nodded slowly. "I'm Cal. This is Lena, Pete, and the rest of the crew. You walked here by yourself." Maddie nodded, eyes wide. Mom doesn't know yet. She tried to help, but nobody listens. Cal's expression hardened, then softened again. "Well, Maddie, you just did the bravest thing a person can do. You asked for help." The woman beside him, Lena, a former EMT with kind eyes behind her helmet visor, knelt so she could meet Maddie's gaze. "We got you, kiddo," she said quietly. "We walk with you today. No engines, just boots." Someone paid the bill without being asked. The waitress grabbed a to-go cup for Cal. The cooks watched from the window as Maddie stepped outside, surrounded by leather and denim. They looked like a wall, rough as solid, unbreakable. And in the center of it was a little girl clutching her jacket, smiling for the first time in weeks. Halfway down the block, one of the same boys who used to taunt her froze on the corner. He saw Maddie walking with the riders and turned pale. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. For the first time, he looked small. Cal didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The message was already written across the pavement. When they reached the school gate, Erin came running up the sidewalk, hair still damp, panic in her eyes. But when she saw Maddie standing between those bikers, her fear turned to something else. Relief, maybe awe. Maddie looked up and said, "They're helping me, Mom." Erin's voice trembled when she answered, "You did the right thing, baby." The riders waited until Maddie walked through the doors. Then Cal turned to Erin. "We'll be here tomorrow," he said simply. "No kid should walk scared." None of them knew what that single promise would become, how it would ripple through the city, through the schools, through the headlines. But that morning, in a small town wrapped in mountain fog, a 7-year-old girl taught everyone what courage really looks like. And the world was about to find out what happens when bikers trade noise for purpose. The smell of bacon and strong coffee lingered in the air as the morning light spilled across the diner's windows. The hum of conversation that usually filled the room had gone quiet. Everyone was still watching the little girl in the purple jacket who had just asked a group of bikers to walk her to school. Cal Mercer, the broad-shouldered man with the gray beard, rested his elbows on the counter and studied Maddie Cole. His years in the Marines had taught him to read people. Fast, fear, courage, danger. But this was something else. This was pure innocence, meeting a world that hadn't been kind. He could see the tremor in her small hands, the effort it took for her to stand there and not bolt for the door. "Kid," he said softly, "you got guts, you know that?" Maddie didn't answer. She just gripped the straps of her backpack tighter. Lena Alvarez, sitting 2 stools down, turned toward her. She was an EMT when she wasn't on her Harley, a woman whose compassion was the kind that didn't need to be loud to be real. "Let's get you something warm," she said, motioning to the waitress. "Hot chocolate, extra marshmallows." Maddie hesitated. "I don't have money." Lena smiled. "Good thing we do." When the waitress brought the cup steam curling into the air, the diner began to breathe again. The older man near the jukebox went back to his newspaper. The cook called out an order, but at the counter everything stayed still. Cal leaned forward, his tone patient but firm. "You said some boys were following you. You know who they are." Maddie nodded. "They go to my school, they wait for me near the bridge. Sometimes they take pictures of me on their phones. One of them said he knows where I live." The air seemed to thicken. Cal's jaw tightened. Lena's eyes flashed toward him, then to the others. Pete, a quiet man with a Navy anchor tattoo on his wrist, muttered, "Sounds like more than teasing." Cal didn't respond right away. He'd heard too many adults call real threats just kids being kids. It always started small until it didn't. He glanced toward the end booth where a man in a denim vest was reading a Bible under the soft light. Pastor Mike had ridden with Cal for years, serving God and road in equal measure. Cal caught his eye and nodded once. Mike set his book down, slid out of the booth, and joined them. He looked at Maddie like she was one of his own grandkids. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you did the right thing coming here. Nobody should ever make you afraid to walk to school." "I told my teacher," Maddie said quietly, "but she said I'm too sensitive." Lena exhaled, shaking her head. Sounds like that teacher needs a reminder of what sensitive means. Cal looked at his watch. School starts in 40 minutes. He turned toward the group. We're walking her. Pete frowned. You sure, boss? We're not exactly subtle. That's the point, Cal said. Subtle doesn't work when nobody's been listening. Lena pulled out her phone. I'll call her mom first. Erin, right? Maddie nodded, eyes wide with worry. She'll be mad. She'll be scared, Lena corrected. There's a difference. While Lena stepped outside to make the call, Cal leaned back on the stool thinking. The last time he'd been this angry was years ago overseas, when someone under his command had been left unprotected by bad leadership. Different battlefield, same feeling. He looked down at the patch on his vest, the one that said, Ride with Honor. He'd worn it for decades. Maybe it was time to live up to it in a new way. When Lena returned, her expression had softened. She's on her way, she said. Said she'd meet us at the school gate. Cal nodded. Good. He looked around at his crew. We'll form up. No engines today, just boots. We walk, slow, steady. We don't need to say much. The walk'll say it for us. Pete smirked. You mean a wall of steel and denim walking a 7-year-old to school? That'll turn some heads. Good, Cal said again, voice flat. Maybe the right ones. They stood the chairs, scraping against the tile. The cook behind the counter called after them. You boys gonna start a parade, something like that, Cal said. Out front, the morning had brightened. The mist was thinning, sunlight glinting off the rows of parked motorcycles. Cal unzipped one of the saddlebags and pulled out something small, a child-sized leather vest, brown and worn from years of charity rides. Across the back were 3 stitched words, Ride safe, little one. He knelt and held it out to Maddie. Used to belong to my niece, he said. She outgrew it, but the message still fits. Maddie slipped it on and the vest hung just right. She looked smaller inside it, but somehow stronger too. Lena adjusted the collar, then brushed a stray hair from Maddie's face. Now you're official, she said. The group began to move, boots thudding in rhythm on the cracked sidewalk. Maddie walked between Cal and Lena, her small steps matching their long strides. People on the street stopped and stared. Some smiled, some frowned. But no one looked away. At the corner, they passed a group of construction workers who lowered their tools and nodded respectfully. At the next block, a woman pushing a stroller stopped and whispered, Is that the biker who runs the Veterans Toy Drive? Cal didn't respond. The moment wasn't about reputation. It was about protection. Halfway to the school, a police cruiser rolled by slowly. The officer inside gave a puzzled look, then recognized Cal, and raised 2 fingers in a silent salute. Cal nodded back. He'd filed enough complaints about those streets himself. Maybe today would finally make someone pay attention. When they reached the crosswalk in front of Riverside Elementary, Erin was waiting. Her hospital scrubs were half covered by a denim jacket, her face pale with worry. She ran to Maddie and knelt, pulling her into her arms. Then she looked up at Cal, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Cal replied. Just know we're here, every morning until this stops. Maddie squeezed her mom's hand. I'm not scared anymore, she whispered. Cal stood a little taller at that. The kind of pride he hadn't felt in years swelled in his chest. Around him, the riders formed a quiet line, their jackets glinting in the sun. It wasn't an army. It was something deeper, a promise. And in that promise, on a normal street in Asheville, something began to change. A 7-year-old had asked for safety, and a wall of strangers had decided she would have it. The next morning, the people of Asheville woke to a sound that turned heads from porches and coffee counters, the slow, steady rumble of motorcycle engines rolling down Riverside Drive. It wasn't chaos, it was order. Every engine throttled low, moving as one heartbeat. Behind the lead bike in the center of that thundering line walked a 7-year-old girl in a tiny leather vest that read, "Ride safe, little one." Her name was Maddie Cole. The people staring from sidewalks didn't know it yet, but this morning was about to change how their town defined protection. Cal Mercer led the formation, his hands gripping the bars of a black Harley that had seen 3 decades of road. He wasn't alone. Behind him rode 15 other bikers, veterans, mechanics, a nurse, even a school janitor who'd served 2 tours in Iraq. Some wore club patches, others plain denim. It didn't matter. This wasn't about who belonged to what chapter. This was about one kid who'd been scared too long. Maddie didn't ride this time. She walked between Lena Alvarez and Pastor Mike, her sneakers landing in the footprints they made ahead of her. It was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Lena kept her helmet hooked at her side, the EMT patch on her jacket, catching flashes of morning light. She watched every parked car, every face on the sidewalk. Old instincts scan, assess, protect. Pastor Mike, walking on Maddie's other side, said nothing. He just nodded at the folks watching from the bakery window, his expression calm but unyielding. The town didn't know what to make of it at first. Cars pulled over. Parents stepped out of porches. Someone, filming on their phone, whispered, "What's happening?" And the answer came from a bystander who recognized Cal from the Veterans Memorial ride last year. "That little girl asked them to walk her to school," he said quietly. Looks like they said yes. They moved like a convoy down Riverside past the mural of the bear and the river bridge where Maddie's fears used to live. The boys, who had followed her, those same faces that had sneered and whispered, were nowhere to be found that morning. Maybe they saw the line of bikers. Maybe someone warned them. Either way, the space felt different now. It belonged to her again. As they approached the intersection by the gas station, a patrol car pulled up. The officer, a stocky man in sunglasses, stepped out and stood by his door. "Morning, Cal," he said, half smiling. "You organizing a parade?" "Something like that," Cal answered. "Safety escort." The officer looked down at Maddie, then back at Cal. "You got it under control." "Better believe it." The man nodded and stepped aside. "Then I'll keep traffic clear for you." He lifted his radio, calling in an informal escort, and 2 more cruisers rolled into position ahead. For the first time, authority didn't feel dismissive. It felt aligned. When they reached Riverside Elementary, parents were already gathered by the gate. Word had spread fast, texts, whispers, social media posts. The sight was unreal bikers in formation engines idling, low leather and chrome, reflecting the early sun. Teachers stood frozen near the steps. The principal, Mr. Davies, came out with a clipboard in hand and an expression that said he wasn't sure whether to call the police or the superintendent. Cal parked his bike, turned off the ignition, and stepped off. The roar faded to silence. Maddie's mother, Erin, was waiting by the fence, eyes-wide scrubs still wrinkled from her night shift. She looked from the riders to her daughter, speechless. Cal gestured gently. "Go ahead, kiddo." Maddie took a deep breath and walked the final 10 feet on her own. When she reached her mom, Erin knelt and hugged her so tightly that the vest crinkled between them. Then she looked up at Cal. "You kept your promise." "Always do," Cal said. Behind them, Pastor Mike and Lena stood side by side scanning the faces around the yard. That's when Lena noticed 2 boys near the basketball court, hands in pockets, pretending to joke, but too still, too aware. She recognized the tension in Maddie's shoulders when she saw them. Without a word, Lena and Pastor Mike started walking that direction. The boys froze as the 2 adults approached. Mike stopped just a few feet away, his shadow stretching across the cracked pavement. "You know, boys," he said softly. I used to think being tough meant making people afraid. Took me 40 years to learn it's the opposite." He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just looked at them long enough for silence to do its work. When he finally turned away, one boy mumbled something about being late for class. The other followed without looking back. By then, a crowd had gathered outside the gates. Someone from the local news station was already setting up a camera. A reporter called out, "Mr. Mercer, can we ask what this is?" Cal faced the lens, not smiling, not grandstanding. "This is what happens when a kid asks for help," he said. And people finally listen. The clip would air that night on Channel 7, shared thousands of times by morning. But in that moment, Cal wasn't thinking about cameras. He was thinking about how quiet the schoolyard had become. The bullies were gone. The fear was gone. And in its place was something heavier but better respect. As the bikers prepared to leave, Lena crouched beside Maddie. "You did good, little one," she said. "You changed something today." Maddie tilted her head. "Will you walk with me tomorrow, too?" Lena smiled. "Count on it." They rode out slowly, engines building to a rhythm that rolled through every block. People stepped out of shops to watch. Some waved. Others just stood arms crossed, the kind of look adults wear when they're remembering what community used to mean. By the time the convoy disappeared over the hill, a feeling lingered in the air, like the echo of thunder after a long storm, relief, awe, and something new taking root. The town had seen what it looked like when ordinary people refused to look away. A 7-year-old girl had walked to school surrounded by a wall of steel and love, and nothing in Asheville would ever be quite the same. The next few days in Asheville didn't look like any other week the town had ever seen. Every morning the roar of engines rolled down Riverside Drive like clockwork. Parents who once turned away from the noise now opened their windows to watch. Children stood at bus stops with their phones out, filming the line of bikers escorting a little girl in a brown leather vest to school. By the third morning, people stopped calling it a parade. They called it what it was, the Walk of Steel. Inside Riverside Elementary, things weren't as quiet. Principal Davies, who had dismissed Maddie's complaints for months, found himself answering questions he wasn't prepared for. The superintendent's office had received calls from parents across the district asking why a 7-year-old had to seek protection from bikers before the school took action. The local paper printed an editorial titled, "When Adults Fail Children, Find Their Own Heroes." Teachers whispered in the hallways. The story was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Cal Mercer hadn't set out to start a movement. He'd just promised a little girl she wouldn't walk scared again. But every time the riders lined up outside the diner, more people showed up, parents holding coffee cups, veterans in old leather jackets, even high school kids who remembered being bullied themselves. Lena Alvarez began organizing safety patrol shifts, creating a rotation so no child would walk alone. Pastor Mike printed flyers for a new hotline where kids could anonymously report harassment. The diner owner offered free breakfast to anyone volunteering. What started as a single act of protection had turned into something larger, a reckoning. But behind the scenes, something darker was surfacing. Late one night, while reviewing old police records, Detective Rosa Finch, a veteran investigator with the Asheville PD, noticed a disturbing pattern. Several reports over the last 2 years, complaints about harassment threats and stalking near local schools, had quietly disappeared from the system. No follow-up, no closure, just blank spaces where there should have been justice. When she ran the addresses, one matched the street where Maddie lived. Another listed a suspect with the same last name as one of the boys Maddie had described. Finch knew what that meant. Someone in authority had been protecting the wrong side. The next morning, Finch walked into the diner where the riders gathered. She wasn't in uniform, just a plain jacket, and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much bureaucracy. Cal looked up from his coffee as she approached. "Detective Finch," she said, flashing her badge. "We need to talk about what's happening at that school." The table went quiet. "We've been looking at this for years," she continued. "But your walk has put light where we couldn't. Parents are coming forward. We're reopening cases." Cal studied her face for a moment. "You're saying the same people who ignored this kid knew it was bigger." Finch nodded. "Worse, they buried it." Lena set down her mug. "Then, it's time to dig it up." That afternoon, word spread that 2 administrators from Riverside Elementary were being placed on leave pending investigation. The school board announced an emergency meeting. For the first time in years, parents packed the gymnasium. Aaron Cole sat in the front row, hands clenched, while the superintendent read a statement about a breakdown in internal procedures. The words were polished, bureaucratic, empty. Then Aaron stood up. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You call this a breakdown," she said, "but it's neglect. It's silence. And it almost cost my daughter her safety." The room erupted in applause. For once, no one tried to quiet it down. Reporters started calling the Walk of Steel a citizen movement. Channel 7 aired interviews with parents, describing how complaints had vanished, how bullies were shielded because of family connections. The next morning, the Asheville Chronicle published Rosa Finch's findings. The headline read, "System Failure, When Silence Becomes Complicity." By noon, state officials had announced a formal inquiry. The principal resigned. 2 members of the school board followed. Through it all, Cal stayed grounded. "We're not politicians," he told a reporter. "We're neighbors. When the system breaks, neighbors fix what they can." His words struck a nerve. Donations poured in for a community safety fund. A group of local mechanics began fixing bikes for free for riders who volunteered. Lena started leading weekend workshops for kids' basic self-defense confidence training awareness. They called it Courage Class. And Maddie, whose trembling voice had started it all, became a quiet symbol of what courage looks like when the world looks away. Every morning she walked between 2 riders, her head high, her steps steady. The same kids who once laughed now waved. Teachers greeted her at the gate. Fear had changed sides. By the end of the month, Asheville wasn't just protecting one child. It was protecting every child. What power had hidden was now exposed. The same community that once trusted silence had learned something simple but unshakable. Sometimes justice doesn't start in a courthouse or a school board. Sometimes it starts with a child brave enough to ask for help and a group of ordinary people willing to answer. Winter came early to Asheville that year, the kind that turned the mountains into soft blue ghosts. But even as the air chilled and the trees stood bare, something in that small town felt warmer than it had in years. Every morning you could still hear the low hum of engines echoing through the streets, but it wasn't about spectacle anymore, it was about rhythm. It was the sound of a promise being kept. 3 months had passed since Maddie Cole first asked a group of bikers to walk her to school, and what started as one frightened child's request had become something much larger, a living, breathing movement that no one could have predicted. The Walk of Steel, as the news called it, was no longer confined to Asheville. Within weeks, photos and videos of the riders escorting children to school had gone viral. Parents from as far as Montana and Oregon began emailing Cal Mercer asking how to organize their own walks. Small towns across the country, many with their own stories of bullying and institutional neglect, began copying the idea. They didn't need much: a few volunteers, reflective vests, steady boots, and the will to show up. Cal didn't think of himself as a leader. He was just a man who'd once promised to protect someone and hadn't forgotten how. But now his phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, community organizers, police chiefs, and even a congressman. He'd seen movements come and go before, But this one wasn't built on slogans or politics. It was built on something harder to shake: decency. "We don't march," he told a journalist from CNN who came to town. "We walk beside. There's a difference." Lena Alvarez had become the backbone of the movement. Her EMT training helped her turn passion into structure. She set up a network called Safe Steps, linking communities across the country who wanted to replicate the Walk of Steel model. She spent long nights at the diner laptop open phone pressed to her ear, connecting volunteers, creating a guide for parent patrols, safety workshops, and neighborhood watch routes that weren't just reactive, but preventative. Pastor Mike and his congregation helped fund the first Courage Station, a small converted garage that offered counseling self-defense classes and after-school programs for kids who didn't feel safe going home alone. One Saturday morning in March, the riders gathered for something different, a rally, not a walk. The city council had closed off the main square downtown. Hundreds of people came out wrapped in scarves and holding signs that read, "Protect all kids," and "Kindness is armor." The mayor, who once thought of the bikers as a nuisance, now stood on stage to thank them publicly. Behind him, banners fluttered with the words, "From one walk to a movement." When Maddie arrived, the crowd quieted. She was taller now, her hair a little longer, her small hands tucked into the oversized leather vest Cal had given her months ago. The same 3 words still stitched across the back: "Ride safe, little one." Erin, her mother, stood nearby, her eyes bright but steady. Cal knelt beside Maddie before she went on stage. "You ready, kiddo?" he asked. Maddie nodded. "You sure you don't want me up there with you?" She smiled faintly. "You already walked me here." The microphone was nearly as tall as she was, but when she spoke, her voice carried. "I used to be scared every day," she began. "I thought nobody would ever help me. But then people did, big people who didn't even know me. And then other people started helping too, and now other kids don't have to be scared to go to school. I don't think I'm brave. I just think sometimes being brave means asking out loud." The applause that followed rolled across the square like thunder. Cal stood at the edge of the stage, his throat tight, hands in his jacket pockets. He'd seen combat funerals, the kind of grief that leaves a mark, but nothing hit him like the sight of a child standing where fear used to live. Lena wiped a tear she didn't bother hiding. Pastor Mike bowed his head in quiet prayer. The following week, national headlines picked up the story again. "The Walk That Changed Asheville. How One Child's Fear Sparked a New Kind of Neighborhood Watch." Meet the bikers who rewrote the rules of protection. Donations poured into the Courage Class Fund, and other towns began sending photos of their own. Walk lines of adults in leather jackets, reflective gear, or even high school sports uniforms, all walking kids to school. In one photo from Missouri, a police cruiser led the way, followed by 20 bikers and 50 kids holding hands. The caption read, "No child walks alone." Not everyone approved. Some critics called it unnecessary, even theatrical. But Cal never argued back. "If it looks dramatic," he said during a local interview, "that's only because silence used to be normal. We're just giving decency a sound again." As spring warmed the Blue Ridge Valley, the Walk of Steel became woven into the fabric of the town. On Fridays, the riders no longer just walked. Maddie, they walked whole groups of kids. Teachers joined. So did parents who once stood on the sidelines. The route grew from a few blocks to nearly a mile. Cars honked in support. Bakers left out boxes of donuts for the walkers. And on the last day of school, the kids waiting at the gate held up handmade signs that said, "Thank you for making us brave." That evening, Cal sat outside the diner as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Maddie and Erin joined him for milkshakes, a new Friday tradition. The air smelled like fried dough and lilacs from the nearby park. Maddie leaned on the counter chin, propped in her hands, "Do you think the walks will stop when I get older?" she asked. Cal looked down at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "No," he said. "They'll just get bigger. You started something that doesn't end when you grow up." A few weeks later, a letter arrived addressed to Cal and the Riders. It came from a small town outside Tulsa. A mother wrote that her son, who had been bullied for months, saw Maddie's story online and asked their local biker group for help. They walked him to school the next morning, the letter said. He said it was the first time he felt taller than his fear. Cal read the words twice, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. By the end of that summer, Maddie's story had become more than news. It was a legend shared in classrooms, churches, and coffee shops across the country. It wasn't about bikers or small towns, or even courage anymore. It was about what happens when ordinary people stop waiting for permission to care. In Asheville, they still walked every morning. The engines still hummed. And if you stood on the corner near Riverside Elementary at sunrise, you could still hear the sound that started it all, the quiet footsteps of a little girl who decided fear didn't get the last word. When all is said and done, the story of little Maddie Cole isn't just about a child who found safety. It's about a community that remembered what it means to protect its own. It began with fear. Yes, a 7-year-old girl too scared to walk to school. A mother who felt invisible to the very people meant to help. But what followed turned into something far greater than any of them imagined. One desperate question. "Will you walk me to school?" became the spark that transformed a quiet mountain town into a movement that inspired the nation. Cal Mercer and his riders never set out to be heroes. They didn't wear badges, didn't hold office, didn't ask for headlines. But when Maddie walked into that diner, they did what good people do. They showed up. They listened. They stood between a child and her fear. From that moment forward, Asheville was never the same. The sound of roaring engines that once meant danger came to mean safety, solidarity, and love. It was the sound of a promise being kept. The walk of steel became more than a protective escort. It became a mirror held up to society. It showed what happens when institutions fail, but individuals refuse to. When systems look away, communities can still rise. The bikers' act of compassion pulled back the curtain on the negligence, corruption, and complacency that had allowed injustice to grow unchecked. But more importantly, it reminded ordinary people that they had power too, the power to say enough. As the months passed, Maddie's courage rippled far beyond her small town. Parents, veterans, teachers, and neighbors across America began forming their own Safe Steps programs, ensuring no child had to walk alone again. The movement didn't belong to any one person. It belonged to everyone who understood that protecting children isn't just a moral choice. It's a human responsibility. And Maddie, the little girl who once hid from shadows now, walks tall hand in hand with the very people who answered her call. She's living proof that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes speaks in a whisper, in a trembling voice that dares to ask for help. And when that voice is heard, the world changes. The lesson here is simple but powerful. We are all responsible for one another. Courage doesn't always mean fighting. It means showing up. It means listening when someone says they're scared. It means refusing to stay silent when silence lets harm continue. You don't need a leather vest or a motorcycle to make a difference. You just need the heart to care, the courage to act, and the compassion to keep going when others stop. In a world that often feels divided, Maddie's story is a reminder that unity still exists. It lives in neighbors who step forward, in strangers who become protectors, and in small acts of kindness that echo louder than fear. If this story moved you, if you believe in courage, compassion, and community, then help us keep these stories alive. Hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and be part of a movement that refuses to look away. Because the world doesn't just need to hear stories like Maddie's, it needs to remember that heroes still walk among us. Sometimes they ride beside us too,